It's nighttime. Again. You've done enough today. More than enough, actually. All the running, the scrolling, the remembering, the regretting. But now you're here, eh? Where none of that matters. Let's let it all go together. Tonight, I'll tell you a story that's colder than the grave and strangely, somehow more comforting. A story of healing, yes, healing delivered not by doctors or potions or whispered prayers, but by the soft, clammy hand of a dead person. That's right. Once upon a time, in a world not as far from ours as we'd like to believe, people truly thought that touching the hand of a corpse, preferably freshly executed, could cure all manner of ills. From cancerous lumps to cursed warts, from goiters to guilt, the dead hand had powers. Or at least, people said it did. And tonight, we won't judge. We'll simply descend, slowly, like morning fog into a graveyard. And let history wrap around us like a burial shroud, gentle, musty, absurd. Take a deep breath in. And out. Let's go to a place where magic smelled like rotting skin. It begins, of course, with belief. In pre-modern Europe, belief wasn't optional, it was reality. People believed in miracles, demons, humors, saints, curses, and signs in the stars. They believed that disease came from sin, or bad air, or angry spirits. And if you believed in the disease that way, then why wouldn't you believe in a cure that walked, or rather didn't walk, among you? Picture a small English village in the 17th century. The air smells like whetstone, chimney smoke, and sheep. There's a child with a stubborn wart. His mother doesn't have money for a physician, nor would she trust one if she did. But she's heard from Agnes down the lane that a dead man's touch will do it. She waits. One day, a criminal is hanged in the town square. A murderer, or a poacher, or a heretic. The details don't matter as much as the outcome. His body is still warm. And after the crowd has gasped and gawked and prayed, the woman, with her child clutched to her, approaches the executioner. She gives him a small coin. He shrugs. He takes the child's hand and places it lightly, reverently onto the hand of the dangling corpse. 1, 2, 3. The wart will fall off, she is told. Sometimes in a day, sometimes in a week, but it will fall. This wasn't just one story. It was common. This was a thing. It had a name, the touch of the dead hand. Not a myth, not an urban legend. A documented folk cure practiced for centuries. And while it sounds medieval, and it was, the practice lasted well into the 1800s. Newspapers recorded it. Physicians complained about it. Clergymen tried to forbid it. But the dead, as always, had the final word. What makes a hand dead and healing? Why not a foot? Or a rib? Why not a whisper in the dark? There's something about the hand, symbol of action, of giving, of blessing. Jesus healed with his hands. Kings anointed with them. Doctors diagnosed with them. Hands hold power. But a dead hand? That's power without consent. It doesn't care about your prayer. It's not trying to heal you. And maybe that's what made it work. Because it was the body stripped of soul, of mercy, of ego. It had no will, and perhaps in a world ruled by spirits and gods, that made it a perfect channel. A passive conduit for divine or infernal forces. Or maybe it was just cold and gross enough to feel like something must be happening. Let's not forget the executioners. They were not just bringers of death. They were healers of the underclass. Many of them, paradoxically, doubled as folk doctors. Why? Because they had access to parts of the human body that no one else could legally touch. In some places, they collected fat from the hanged and sold it to apothecaries. Made salves. Sold powdered skull for epilepsy. And they provided the most sacred touch of all. The hangman's hand still stained from the rope, bringing life through death. Some even formalized it. In 18th century Germany, the town executioner was known to keep a schedule. Tuesdays for hangings, Wednesdays for treatments. Business was booming. For the poor, anyway. But before we laugh, or roll our eyes, or turn off the light. Let's pause, because beneath the absurdity lies something almost beautiful. A society with no anesthesia, no antibiotics, no MRI scans, or urgent care. What did they have? Hope, superstition, and each other. Even in death, especially in death, the community came together. They watched. They waited. They believed. A wart cured by a dead man's touch is more than just folklore. It's a story about desperation wrapped in ritual, about mothers holding sick children in the rain, and finding solace in the cold clasp of finality. So tonight, as we begin this tale, remember, this isn't a horror story. It's a lullaby made of bones. Sleep is, after all, a little death. And death, in these stories, was a little cure. Let's keep going. Let's gently sink deeper into the graveyard of forgotten medicine. No hurry, no fear. Just strange footsteps on damp grass lit by the cold moon of history. In the previous part, we touched, pun absolutely intended, on how the hand of a dead person was believed to carry curative powers. But what exactly could it cure? Let's make a list. A list for bedtime, naturally. Warts, goiters, scrofula, tumors, rickets, epilepsy, night terrors, the king's evil, and perhaps guilt. Some of these were skin ailments, others far deeper. Some were visible, others invisible. Some were probably psychosomatic, others life-threatening. But they had something in common: they all made people feel cursed. And when you feel cursed, what you want most is not a remedy. You want a reversal. You want a magic. You want the thing that is worse than you, the dead, to make you better. Warts were the most common complaint. There are little things, not dangerous, not dramatic, just stubborn. They cling. They mock. They don't respect ointments or prayers. And that made them ideal for magical thinking. The idea went like this: if you touched a wart with the hand of the freshly dead, it would transfer into the corpse like static electricity. Why? Because the body was still warm, still in between, still not fully claimed by death. Children were often the recipients, and they were told to count while the dead hand pressed gently on the wart. 1, 2, 3. That's all. No cutting, no chanting. Just the weight of silence and skin. Some even believed the wart would reappear on the hand of the corpse later. A kind of trade, a grotesque barter. Take this part of me. You're not using your skin anymore, are you? Now imagine a goiter. A great swollen neck, bulging like a pillow of dough. It throbs when you speak. It turns heads for the wrong reasons. In some regions, people believed the dead hand could shrink a goiter simply by resting upon it. Just place the hand, cold, heavy, possibly twitching from post-mortem reflex, on the lump. Hold. Wait. Again, it was the idea of transfer. The dead absorb what the living reject. But this wasn't done in secret. Sometimes it was public, especially during executions. Let's talk about that. In early modern England, public executions were not just punishments, they were events. There were vendors, songs, printed pamphlets, even snacks. And there were mothers holding children, standing in line to touch the corpse. As soon as the hanged man or woman stopped twitching, the executioner would be swarmed. People shouting, "Here, my boy's wart, my lump, my fits." It became a ritual of crowds. And the executioner, grim as ever, would sometimes charge a small fee. A penny to touch the hand, a little more to touch the foot. A small bonus if you wanted both hands and a cheek. If the body was still swinging from the rope, even better. Fresher equals stronger. Like fruit. Of course, this wasn't all folk superstition. Even royalty got involved. There was a long-held belief in something called the king's touch or the royal touch, especially in England and France. The disease? Scrofula, a form of tuberculosis that caused grotesque swelling in the neck and lymph nodes. disfiguring, painful, terrifying. And it was widely believed that only the king blessed by God could cure it. With a touch. Imagine that, monarchs holding royal ceremonies where peasants lined up, sick and weeping, to be touched by their sovereign. The king would press his fingers to the swelling and hand over a coin called a touch piece. Henry VII did it. Elizabeth I did it. Even Charles II, between affairs and exiles, did it thousands of times. They were not doctors. They were not even gentle. But they were divine. And that was enough. So how different is the corpse's touch, really? If the king's hand can heal because it's above human, then the dead hand heals because it's beyond human. Both represent something otherworldly. One divine, one decayed, but each was sacred in its own way. Each offered hope when nothing else did. You were either healed by the gods or by ghosts. Let's return to that ghostly idea. Some believed that the dead could heal because they were in between. Their souls hadn't left entirely. They hovered, watched, listened, and maybe, just maybe, a dead hand had unfinished business. Like one last cure. Some even whispered that the dead person's sins could soak up your sickness. That by touching them, your illness would cling to their soul like wet linen. It's strange logic, but not stranger than antibiotics if you think about it hard enough. By the 1800s, this practice began to die out. Science grew louder. Doctors gained tools. Executions went indoors. And death became private. But in corners of rural Ireland, Wales, France, and Eastern Europe, there were still grandmothers who knew which hill had the best graveyard for healing. There were still midwives who whispered about the old ways. And there were still warts that medicine couldn't explain. So tonight, as you lie there, warm and safe, just know, if you lived 200 years ago, your cure might have involved a corpse. Not a pill, not a prayer, just the silent, unmoving grace of death. And somehow that brought peace. So sleep now and dream softly. There's more to this story. Let's drift further, deeper, into a stranger kind of hospital. No fluorescent lights, no white coats, just the creaking of a rope and the rustle of coins changing hands. Welcome to the executioner's clinic, where the doctor is also the hangman and your appointment depends on someone else's sentence. It sounds macabre, and it was. But for hundreds of years across Europe, especially in Germany, Austria, and parts of France, the local executioner wasn't just the one who ended lives. He was the one who preserved them. Healer, barber, bone setter, dealer in things most people didn't want to touch. Let's begin with a man named Franz Schmidt. He was the official executioner of Nuremberg in the late 1500s and early 1600s. He kept a detailed diary of every beheading, hanging, and burning he performed. But in the margins, he also recorded something else. His medical treatments. Franz didn't just decapitate. He treated ulcers. He removed gallstones. He drained abscesses, set broken limbs, and advised on pregnancies. He saw more patients than many university-trained doctors. And he was proud of it. In fact, he called himself Meister Franz, not as a killer, but as a medicus, a man of knowledge and skill. He performed over 15,000 medical procedures in his lifetime. His patients ranged from poor farmers to nervous nobility. He never claimed magical powers, just effective hands. But he had one advantage over other healers: access to parts. You see, the executioner had legal rights that few others did. He could keep bits of the body. Not in some grotesque serial killer way, no, this was medical, practical, profitable. The fat of the freshly executed was considered especially potent. It was used to make healing salves for bruises, joint pain, and oddly, nosebleeds. Apothecaries sold it under the name human fat or hangman's grease. Customers knew what it was, and they bought it anyway. There was also powdered skull, used to treat epilepsy and falling sickness. The theory, if you consumed part of a dead man's wisdom, or at least his calcium, you'd be steadier, more grounded. Skull was crushed and mixed with wine or beer, served as a kind of morbid smoothie. It wasn't just lower-class belief either. This practice made its way into royal courts. Even King Charles II of England was said to distill a personal potion called the King's Drops, which included gold leaf and human remains. What a bedtime drink! But the centerpiece, the most intimate therapy, was still the dead hand touch. And here, the executioner became both gatekeeper and guide. If a person suffered from an incurable ailment, something visible, something embarrassing, they might approach him quietly. "Master," they'd say, "I've a growth. It won't go." They'd show the lump, the wart, the boil. He would nod and say, "Come back Thursday, after the hanging." No appointment, no paperwork, just faith and 5 pennies. On execution day, after the crowd dispersed, the body would hang limply. Still warm, the executioner would take the client by the hand, lead them forward, and guide their fingers to the dead one's palm, or place the corpse's hand on their affliction. Sometimes once, sometimes 3 times, always with silence. Some said you had to do it before the body was cut down. Some insisted it only worked on criminals, unclean energy to pull out unclean ailments. Others believed the manner of death mattered. Hanged for murder? Best for warts. Burned for heresy? Better for spiritual afflictions. Beheaded? Good for headaches. A sort of corpse homeopathy. Like here's like. Was it gross? Of course. But it was also a ceremony. And in places where official medicine was rare, dangerous, or expensive, the executioner was the most consistent option around. He didn't just cure. He listened. He looked. He touched. He acknowledged your pain without laughing or lecturing. He was, in his own way, a physician for the forgotten. And if he was feared, he was also respected. Executioners often lived at the edge of town. Literally, no one wanted to live next to death. But that also meant they lived at the edge of systems. Not fully church, not fully state. They were outside but necessary. Shunned but sought. Their tools hung on the wall, axes, ropes, brands. But next to them, herbs, salves, jars of mysterious powder. A shelf for bones. A bowl for blood. One visitor to a German executioner's house described it as half butcher shop, half apothecary. Imagine that at bedtime. Children feared them. Adults bribed them. Women came for love potions. Men came for virility salves. Old women came for pain relief. Young mothers came for their children's coughs. And all of them knew the price. Not always money. Sometimes it was just silence. A promise not to speak of what they saw, not to ask what went into the cream, not to look too long at the jars in the back. Medicine, after all, is often about not knowing. And through it all, the executioner never smiled much. He had his hands in 2 worlds. One ending life, one preserving it. He was both terror and hope. The last man a criminal saw, and the first man a sick child might touch in the morning. He didn't preach. He didn't promise miracles. Just a hand, dead or alive. So tonight, as we lie here beneath warm blankets and dim light, remember that history's strangest healers walked in blood and offered balm. Not because they believed in magic, but because people needed it. And that need, that ache for comfort in a cruel world, is older than any science, older than the rope, older than the touch. Sleep now, and if you dream of heavy hands resting on your chest, just know, they mean well. We've spent time with executioners. We've touched warts with corpses. Now let's walk through candlelit corridors, past golden reliquaries, and into the polished, perfumed world of saintly fingers. because not all dead hands were swinging from gallows. Some were glowing in glass cases. Tonight, we step into the softer, stranger overlap between faith and flesh, where the touch of a dead hand wasn't just folk magic. It was holy medicine. Picture this: a medieval cathedral, stone walls thick with incense, a quiet procession of the sick, bent, limping, coughing, waiting not for a doctor, but for a bone. In front of them sits a priest wearing robes heavy with embroidery, and next to him on a velvet pillow, a withered, blackened hand. It may be wrapped in silver, or encased in glass, but it is real. It once belonged to Saint somebody. Name doesn't matter as much as the miracles. The faithful come forward. They kneel. They touch their sores to the case. Some press their lips to the fingernails. Some whisper prayers as they hold a baby close to the mummified knuckle. And they believe. The Catholic Church in the Middle Ages and beyond developed a very complex relationship with body parts. Relics, physical remains of saints, were considered direct conduits to the divine. The body of a holy person, even in death, retained spiritual potency, and certain bits were especially powerful. Skulls for wisdom, bones for strength, blood for intercession, and hands for healing, because hands in life were instruments of charity, work, prayer, and in death they became symbols of continuation. The saint's grace reaching beyond the grave. Relics weren't just tokens. They were technologies of belief. There were official rankings, rules, certificates of authenticity. Yes, really. The church cataloged them, guarded them, fought wars over them. Whole cities claimed fame and fortune through relics. Pilgrims traveled across Europe to touch a bone, and entire economies sprang up around these sacred scraps. There were even traveling relics like roadshows of holy power. A saint's hand would be paraded through plague-stricken towns, and people would line the streets just to glimpse it, to get close, to feel the cold breeze of eternity blow across their fevered brows. Now, were all these relics real? Let's just say the medieval market for body parts was booming. There are, to this day, over a dozen authentic right hands of John the Baptist scattered around Europe, which is a lot of right hands for one man. But no one cared. It wasn't about anatomical accuracy. It was about hope. And hope doesn't need bones to be real, just felt. But there was another reason the hand mattered. A hand isn't just a symbol of action. It's personal. A touch is intimate. So to feel a saint's hand, even indirectly, was to feel touched by heaven. There are stories of miraculous healings. Children with fevers calming at the relic's approach. Tumors shrinking after a single kiss to a relic ring. Blindness lifting in the presence of a bony pinky. Of course, there are also stories of hands that refused to heal because the supplicant was sinful or ungrateful or had doubted. In other words, relics had attitude. Some saints' hands were said to never decay. Take the hand of Saint Francis Xavier, the 16th century Jesuit missionary. After his death, his body was exhumed and his right forearm, the one used to bless and baptize, was removed and preserved. That arm, to this day, is housed in a golden reliquary in Rome. It is blackened but intact. It has traveled the world. It has healed people, and it has never officially decomposed. Science says embalming. Believers say miracle. Either way, it's a hand that hasn't let go. But relics weren't always so gentle. Some were used in more assertive ways. In certain regions, it was customary to pass a relic hand over a sick person's body, like scanning a barcode of holiness. Others would place a holy finger in a dying person's mouth, a kind of spiritual CPR. If they died while touching the relic, it was believed they'd go straight to heaven. No purgatory, no waiting room, just a fast pass of faith. This brings us back to a deeper question. What's the difference between the dead hand of a saint and the dead hand of a thief? One heals with robes and incense, the other with rope and silence. But both are dead. Both are believed in. Both are touched by the desperate. And in a world without antibiotics, MRIs, or germ theory, a touch was a prescription. No side effects, except the occasional shiver. Somewhere in some chapel in a village you've never heard of, there's still a bone in a box. A hand. A finger. A piece. People still light candles near it. Whisper things to it. And sometimes they get better. Not because of calcium or bacteria or molecular mechanics, but because someone touched them. Because they believed. Because someone cared enough to press a cold hand to a warm forehead and say, "You're going to be okay." So tonight, in the flicker between wake and sleep, think of all those hands. Saints, sinners, healers, killers, dead but reaching. Maybe that's what medicine is in the end. A reaching hand. And the hope that someone somewhere is reaching back. If you listen closely, very closely, you might still hear it. The creak of the rope. The murmur of the crowd. The soft shuffle of boots on damp cobblestone. It's not an execution. Not yet. It's a medical appointment. Let's return to the gallows not as a place of punishment, but of healing, where the condemned met their end and the sick found new beginnings. Tonight, we explore the strange, structured world of gallows medicine, where the boundary between crime and cure was blurred and sometimes braided into a noose. The idea that executions could be medically useful wasn't just superstition. It was for a time institutional practice. Across Europe, the act of execution, especially hanging, was surrounded by rituals of healing. Let's take a closer look. In 17th century England, if you had a wart, a tumor, or a king's evil scrofula, you might wait at the foot of the gallows. Not to watch, but to approach, right after the drop, while the body was still swinging, still warm. The hangman, a man both feared and respected, would descend the scaffold, and with a practiced hand take the executed man's fingers and press them against the afflicted. 1, 2, 3. Sometimes a chant, sometimes a coin exchanged, sometimes just silence. The body, they said, was still close to life, and in that moment, suspended between the breath and the grave, it had power. But this wasn't an improvisation. There were rules. Timing mattered. Touch had to occur within minutes of death. The fresher the corpse, the more potent the cure. There are recorded accounts where people argued over place in line, worried the body would go cold before it was their turn. No one wanted to be last. Some brought entire families. One child with a lazy eye, another with epilepsy, a grandmother with a lump on her shoulder, all waiting for that miraculous touch. And if the crowd was too large, well, you might touch the body yourself, grabbing a hand, pressing a boil to the chest, whispering a desperate plea into a lifeless ear. The executioner in many towns kept appointments. Seriously, a woman might ask, "When is your next hanging?" He'd reply, "Tuesday, just after noon." She'd nod, say thank you, and return with her son, his head wrapped in cloth. It sounds absurd, but in a world where barbers doubled as surgeons and astrology guided prescriptions, this wasn't even the strangest thing happening. Some even believed the manner of death influenced the cure. Hanged criminals were good for skin diseases, beheaded criminals for fevers and headaches, burned heretics? Excellent for spiritual afflictions. Drowned? Possibly useful for chest ailments, but less desirable overall, too soggy. The dead weren't just dead. They were prescribed. Like choosing a tea for a particular mood or a wine for a specific cheese. Ah, yes, you'll want a murderer, not a thief, for that abscess. One of the most fascinating cases comes from 19th century Ireland, where even as medicine became more modern, the gallows touch lingered in rural memory. In a county with no hospital, a priest recorded that townspeople still believed in the virtue of the hanged hand. They would gather at the jail not to protest, but to prepare. Women brought children wrapped in shawls. Men rolled up their sleeves to show growths, boils, hernias. And when the trapdoor opened, hope rose, not from cruelty, not from vengeance, but from the belief that death could give something back. In Germany, there were reports of people cutting locks of hair from the freshly executed, or collecting drops of blood for tinctures, or scraping dried skin into tiny packets later steeped in wine. Yes, really, blood of the hanged was believed to be particularly useful for epilepsy. Why? Because epilepsy, the falling sickness, was seen as a spiritual disorder, and the blood of a sinner shed publicly might shock the body back into balance. Or so they thought. Science had little to offer. Faith, however, faith was abundant. The rituals weren't just medical. They were often communal. The condemned man, if he knew his touch would be used, sometimes consented. There are cases where the criminal, moments before death, would bless a child with a kiss, or offer a final word, "May this take your suffering." It was grim, but also oddly human. The worst moment of one life became the turning point in another. And here's the real twist. In some towns, criminals with specific diseases were chosen for execution because of the potential cures. A man with epilepsy himself? He might heal another epileptic with his death. It became a weird, twisted economy. A barter system of blood, guilt, and hope. The condemned paid with their life. The sick paid with their belief. Eventually, of course, this all faded. As medicine professionalized, as public executions declined, as antiseptic replaced incense, the idea of gallows cures became a curious footnote. Doctors mocked it. Churches distanced themselves. Governments sanitized it out of the public eye. But even in the 20th century, folk stories lingered. Of a grandmother cured by a dead man's thumb. Of a boy whose seizures stopped after brushing against a noose. The rope may rot, but stories, they swing forever. So tonight, as you rest in stillness, know that the line between healer and executioner was once very thin, and sometimes in the most unthinkable places. People found relief, not in kindness, not in science, but in the quiet hand of someone just released from life. Sleep now. The rope has stopped swinging, but the hand still lingers. Tonight, we go small, not in meaning, but in scale. We've looked at gallows and cathedrals, saints and executioners. But now we focus on the humble wart. Tiny, ugly, persistent. It doesn't threaten your life. It doesn't cause much pain, but it won't go away. And that made it perfect for magic. Let's sink into the world of whispered cures, dirty coins, moonlit rituals, and the most famous patient of the dead hand. The wart. Warts in folklore were never just skin deep. They were signs of imbalance, of shame, of curses. A wart on your nose? A witch. A wart on your hand? Unclean. A wart that grew back? Punishment. Children with warts were told not to pick them, not just because it would bleed, but because it would anger something. What exactly was never clear, but something. And when a wart persisted, when all self-insulting and spitting failed, people turned to the dead. The instructions were always similar. Wait for an execution, or a funeral, or a fresh burial, timing flexible depending on geography and desperation. Find a corpse, or better, the hand of one. Not too cold, not too decayed. Take the afflicted child. Bring them at night or very early morning, always when the veil between worlds was thin. Press the wart gently to the dead person's palm. Hold it there. Count to 3, or 7, or whisper the name of the illness. Some even recommended transferring the wart's name to the dead, like giving away a bad gift. In some versions of the ritual, the wart was spoken to. Leave me, go with him. He has no more need of skin. Yes, really. Imagine a worried mother in a foggy English field. A corpse laid out in a wooden box. A child squirming, confused, and the mother gently guiding their little hand forward. Just for a second. Just for a chance. And then waiting. Not for a doctor's report. Not for test results. Just watching. For a change in the skin. For the wart to dry. Fall. Disappear. Some even claim to see the wart appear on the corpse the next day. As if the body accepted the exchange. No complaint. No receipt. Just a quiet acceptance. I'll take this for you. There are reports in rural France, Hungary, and parts of the Balkans where villagers swore they could tell which body had been used. By the mark on its hand, it was considered a gift to be chosen as the vessel of healing. Better than rotting in obscurity. Better than feeding only worms. In areas where bodies weren't available, say no executions that week, people got creative. Substitutes included grave dirt, rubbed onto the wart, sometimes during a full moon. A finger bone, borrowed from an ossuary or charnel house. Funeral candles, the wax melted and touched to the skin. Shadows of the dead, standing in the moonlight where a coffin had passed. Yes, even a shadow was believed to carry the lingering power of the dead. It wasn't about flesh. It was about closeness to death. The idea that death wanted company. And might accept a wart as, well, partial payment. Wart rituals weren't limited to death. There were other absurd methods passed down. Rubbing the wart with a stolen potato, then burying it at a crossroads. Counting your warts aloud, then never saying the number again. Spitting on a beetle and whispering the wart's name. Tying a string around the wart, then throwing it into a fire at midnight while reciting. Burn, burn, take it away. To the ashes, not to stay. These rituals often overlapped. A child might do all of them. A mother might try every version, depending on who she talked to at the market. Medicine? Not really. But comfort? Absolutely. And here's where it gets truly poetic. Sometimes the ritual was more about the wish than the result. The child would ask, "Will it work?" The mother would nod. They'd go home. Sleep, and within days, the wart might fall. Because belief is strange. The body listens to stories. And sometimes, so does the skin. There's a German tale of a boy with 13 warts. He counted them aloud each night, then whispered, "Take them, take them, take them." One day he forgot how many he had. The next morning they were gone. No one knew why. Only that forgetting was part of the cure. That's how absurd medicine often works. Through mystery, through forgetting, through hope. There's something oddly beautiful in all of this. Not the warts, not the death, but the way people tried. They didn't have creams or laser removal. They had stories, and a willingness to believe that the world might still be negotiable. That even death might accept a small trade. A lump for a life, a blemish for peace. So tonight, as you drift off, if you have some little ache or imperfection, something no doctor can name, close your eyes, imagine a cold hand reaching for it. Not to hurt, not to take, but to hold it gently and carry it away. Not all cures come in bottles. Some come in whispers, and some in silence. Let's leave the warts behind. Leave the smallness, the bumps, the whispered rhymes. Tonight we turn to something thicker, heavier, stranger. We turn to the bones. Not the fingers that reached, not the hands that healed, but what remained when all else was gone. And we pair it, of course, with butter. Because nothing says medicine quite like a little melted dairy and powdered corpse. Welcome to the world of bones and butter salves. medieval medicine's most horrifying moisturizers. Let's start simple. In parts of Germany and Austria, well into the 17th century, healers sold a product called hanged man's grease. In Latin, it was called exsungia hominis suspensi. It was made from the fat of criminals, collected shortly after death, rendered into salves, mixed with herbs, and sometimes spread directly on open wounds. Yes, that happened. But what about the bones? Well, once the soft bits were gone, the bones could be ground, used as powder, added to ointments, or boiled to extract the remaining essence. Sometimes they were burned. The ash was believed to retain the fire of life, especially if the person had died violently. A calm death? Useless. But a painful one? Now that's medicine. So imagine this recipe. It's a real one, recorded in 1692. One femur from a recently hanged man, a handful of dried rosemary, a lump of unsalted butter, a pinch of salt, a whisper of sulfur. Boil gently, stir clockwise, apply to bruises, joint pain, or stubborn sadness. It reads like a stew, but it was sold as healing balm, and customers paid well, because bones didn't just cure the body, they protected it. Some believed powdered bone could ward off bad dreams. Mixed with butter and rubbed on the soles of the feet, were sprinkled into shoes. Others applied it to their foreheads before battle, believing it made them fearless. In northern France, a popular ointment, known as la pommade de morts, included bone ash, butter, and a drop of human blood, used for arthritis, or melancholy, or the vague feeling of being too alive. It gets better. In certain folk rituals, a butter salve made from bone ash was smeared on doorways, windowsills, and baby cribs to protect against evil spirits, witchcraft, sickness, nightmares, unwanted visitors. It was a kind of corpse-based security system. The dead were not just healers, they were guardians, applied directly to the problem areas. The butter mattered too. Butter was soft, malleable, absorbent. It carried the essence of the bone, and it melted easily into human skin. People believed that butter, being of the cow, a sacred animal in some traditions, had a kind of base vitality. It was considered a living fat. Unlike oils from plants, butter still had warmth. So mixing it with dead bone, perfect balance. Life and death, warmth and cold, cow and criminal. There were rules, of course. The best bones came from hanged men, beheaded heretics, drowned sinners, rare but potent. Occasionally, suicide victims, dangerous but powerful. The bones had to be collected soon after death, before the soul left entirely, before the heat was gone. Sometimes they were stolen. Grave robbing wasn't just for thieves, it was for apothecaries too. A bone pulled from the gallows post at midnight? Highly prized. And what did people say about these remedies? Some claimed their limp vanished overnight. Others said their rage melted after one application. A woman in 1734 insisted she stopped dreaming of her dead husband after applying the salve to her temples. His voice went quiet, she wrote, like butter left out too long, poetic, disturbing, and somehow believable. Not everyone approved. Church authorities were divided. Some saw these salves as relic abuse. Others simply ignored them. Doctors, once universities took over medicine, scoffed, called it witchcraft. But even they couldn't explain why some patients got better. Because sometimes belief is medicine. And if you tell a man that rubbing bone butter on his knees will fix them, and he believes you, well, maybe they will. There's something sad and sweet here. These were not monsters. They were just people, trying to mix what they had, trying to soothe what hurt. A mother in a cold cottage, her child coughing, no doctor for miles, just a small jar passed down through women who remembered. Butter, bone, prayer, a smear on the chest, a hand on the forehead, and sleep. So tonight, if your knees ache, if your heart feels a bit too loud, don't reach for a pill just yet. Close your eyes. Imagine a jar, soft yellow, smelling of ash and rosemary, and someone, gentle, ancient, quiet, rubbing it into your temples. No questions, no side effects, just silence, and maybe a little peace. It's a quiet question, but one worth asking. If you could be healed by touching a hand, would it matter whose hand it was? Would you rather press your forehead to the skeletal finger of a saint, or let the cooling skin of a criminal soothe your wound? Both are dead. Both, it seems, have power, and tonight we lie still between those two hands. Holy and unholy, halo and hangman's knot. Let's see which one feels warmer. We've already visited relics, the saint's hand encased in gold, kissed by the devout. Polished, labeled, celebrated, miracles documented, pilgrimages arranged. And then there's the other kind. The criminal's hand. Dirty, dangling, forgotten by the state but remembered by mothers with coughing children. What's the difference? Let's try to untangle it. Saints were holy by narrative. They performed miracles in life, or died dramatically, or both. Their body parts, therefore, were sacred by extension. But criminals, especially those hanged, were holy by utility. They didn't die for a cause. They died because the law said so. But their deaths were often public, and public death has a strange usefulness, especially if you're sick. In some communities, you didn't have access to a saint's relic. No golden case, no visiting bishop, but you did have access to the gallows. You did know when the next execution was. You could leave early, bring your child, and press their rash-ridden cheek to the body swinging in the sun. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't sanctioned, but it was available. And sometimes in medicine, that's all that matters. What's more democratic than that? The saint's relic was often locked away, accessible only through ritual, controlled by clergy, sometimes monetized. But the criminal's hand? That was folk medicine, community-owned, shared in whispers, used with desperation. It was healing without permission, without hierarchy. A mother needed no priest to say, "Go, touch him. Let him take it from you." She just went. Still, some believed that saints and sinners healed in different ways. The saint's hand was for the soul. The criminal's hand was for the flesh. If your sickness felt divine, like a punishment or a curse, you sought the relic. But if it was physical, skin, growth, ache, you went to the hanged man. It was a split prescription, like choosing between herbal tea or whiskey. Both might help. Depends on what hurts. And there was overlap. Some believed that a sinner's body, if repurposed properly, became almost saintly. Not by holiness, but by service. That the criminal, by being used to heal, paid their debt. A poetic kind of purgatory. One ward at a time. There are letters from the 1700s where families thanked the hangman for allowing their child to be cleansed by the sinner. It wasn't mockery. It was gratitude. The dead man, unnamed, faceless, had become part of the child's story. And that meant something. One particularly strange example. In 18th century Poland, there was a town where a wooden hand was carved in honor of a well-known hanged thief because so many warts had fallen after his death. The real hand, of course, decomposed. But the legend lived on. Parents would bring their children to this fake wooden hand bolted to the gallows post and reenact the ritual. Touch, count, leave. It had become symbolic medicine. Placebo? Probably. But maybe the memory of healing is as good as healing itself. In contrast, some saint relics stopped working over time. There are church records where a bishop reports, "The healing from Saint Ludovica's finger seems diminished. The faithful grow impatient." And what do you do with a relic that's lost its touch? Some buried them. Some passed them on to smaller towns. Some quietly replaced them with new fingers. No questions asked. The sinner's hand, in contrast, was single use. One touch, one moment, then gone. But that moment was electric, unrepeatable, like lightning in a field of prayer. It's ironic. The hand of a saint kept pristine in a gold reliquary never touches anyone. It is viewed, venerated, adored, but not used. The hand of a criminal, in contrast, is used immediately, handled, grasped, pressed into boils, and then buried, or discarded. But in that short life, it heals. So which would you choose? The hand of the blessed, or the hand of the damned? The one that smells of incense, or the one that smells of rope and sweat? Maybe the best medicine isn't about who touched you. Maybe it's about the belief that someone did. That someone, be it saint or sinner, reached through the veil and said, "Let me take that from you as you lie here tonight, your hands warm beneath the blanket." Imagine both options beside your bed. On one side, a hand of gold glowing faintly. On the other, a hand of flesh, bruised but warm. Which one would you let touch your cheek? Which one would you trust to carry your pain? It doesn't matter. They're both gone. But they both tried. And maybe in the end, all healing is just someone else's burden. Sleep now. Let them carry it for a while. If you lie still enough, still like the bottom of a lake, still like the inside of a closed coffin, you might feel it. Not cold, not warm, just present. A pressure on the skin, gentle and unsettling, like being watched by something with no eyes. Tonight, we drift into the quietest part of this story, the place where the dead hand doesn't touch but speaks. No, not with words. It whispers in other ways, through dreams, through skin, through sudden relief that has no explanation. Let's talk about the whispering hand. In parts of Scotland and Ireland, especially in the misty hills and peat-wet villages, there was a belief not just in touching the dead, but in being touched by them uninvited. People spoke of healing that came not through contact, but through dreams. A child with a fever would fall asleep, and in the morning the fever would be gone. And they'd say, "The hand came. It touched my head." No one had entered the room. No windows opened, no candles burned, just a dream, and a mark, a cold spot on the pillow. Sometimes a little indentation, like someone had been sitting at the edge of the bed. These tales were usually told by old women. They'd sit by the fire, needles in hand, telling children, "If you sleep with your sickness on your chest, the hand will come and carry it off." Some children grew afraid. Some begged the hand to come every night, and it did, not always with results, but always with presence, because even fear can be soothing, if it's predictable. There are written accounts too. A journal from 1841 kept by a schoolmaster in rural Donegal tells of a girl with a persistent rash who claimed, "Each night I felt the hand, and in the morning the rash had moved. First from her arm to her shoulder, then to her back, then gone. No medicine was given, no prayer said, but the movement felt deliberate, like the sickness was being carried away in small, respectful portions by something that didn't want to frighten her. In Transylvania, stories circulated of the hand collector, a ghost or spirit who came not to harm but to harvest illness. It would drift through windows, slide beneath doors, and place a cool hand on the sleeping body. If the person awoke, they'd see nothing, only hear their own heartbeat. But if they stayed still and accepted the touch, they would get better. Not always, not instantly, but enough to keep the story alive. Some whispered that the hand was that of a dead doctor, still practicing, still helping those too poor to pay. Others believed it was a child, a ghost who had died of plague, now doomed to steal back illness from the living, as if trying to balance the scales. One dreamer said the hand smelled of rosemary. Another said it left behind a single white hair on the bedsheet. Always white, always curled. They kept it in lockets, for protection, or proof. It wasn't always gentle. Some said the hand could be impatient. A man in 1790 claimed he had ignored the dream 3 nights in a row, and on the 4th awoke with a bruise across his ribs shaped like fingers. The next day his cough vanished. Payment, he called it. A little knock for being stubborn. Even in folklore, healing wasn't always kind. Sometimes it was insistent. These stories didn't make it into the medical journals. No Latin names, no footnotes, but they were shared like prescriptions, passed down like heirlooms. If your baby cries without reason, a woman might say, lay them near the east-facing window. Let the hand find them. If a man's limp worsened with the moon, he was told to sleep with one hand outside the blanket. Exposed, vulnerable, an invitation. And if he awoke to tingling fingers, he was not to be afraid. The hand had come. It wasn't about who the hand belonged to. By then, the stories stopped naming. No saints, no sinners, just the hand, like a force, a being made of gesture. Some believed it was a collective of the dead, those who died with love still inside them. They had no bodies left, just memory, just motion, a gesture carried by wind. And here's the curious part. In modern times, people still report this. Search forums, ask the sleepless. You'll find stories. I felt something press my back, but no one was there. It wasn't scary. It felt like permission to rest. Like my illness lifted out of me piece by piece. Maybe the dead haven't stopped helping. Maybe we've just forgotten to thank them. So tonight, as you lie still, if you feel a gentle weight on your shoulder, or a coolness on your cheek, don't flinch. Don't turn on the light. Let the whispering hand do what it came to do. Take what hurts, carry it somewhere quiet, leave you clean, and by morning, you might feel just a little lighter. Not because of science, not because of luck, but because someone, somewhere, still remembers how to reach across. Let's take one last deep breath together. In and out. You've come a long way. Through bone salves and public hangings, saintly pinkies and whispered ghost hands. And maybe somewhere along this peculiar path, a quiet question has been sitting in the back of your mind. Why did they believe any of this? Tonight, we won't just tell stories. We'll look inside the belief itself, not to destroy it, but to understand its organs, its soft tissue, its nervous system, the slow and steady pulse. Let's dissect the anatomy of belief. Start with this. Belief isn't born from logic. It's born from need. In a world without antibiotics, without anesthesia, without the internet's calm suggestion to see a doctor, what did you do when your child wouldn't stop coughing? When your neighbor's leg turned purple? When your wife stopped speaking? You went to the nearest available miracle. Sometimes it was an herb, sometimes a prayer, sometimes a corpse. Not because it was beautiful, not because it made sense, but because it was what you had. Belief, then, is a kind of emergency system. Kicks in when logic fails, when all the things that were supposed to work don't. And that's where the dead hand slips in, quietly, awkwardly, with an offering. You've tried everything else, it seems to say. Why not me? And people listened, because it's easy to mock belief from a warm bed, in an age of sterile hospitals and digital thermometers. But imagine your house cold, your food uncertain, your body aching. Suddenly, the absurd becomes inviting. Now look at the ritual. These weren't random acts. Touching a dead hand wasn't done casually, it had structure. You waited until the body was still warm. You paid the hangman. You counted to 3. You didn't look the corpse in the eyes. You didn't talk afterward. Ritual is how humans turn chaos into something we can hold. The world says, your child might die. The ritual says, if you do this just right, they might not. That's not superstition. That's survival choreography. Even if the steps are strange, they keep you moving. And then there's storytelling. Every cure was followed by a tale. My wart disappeared the next morning. The fever broke right after the touch. My sister's rash migrated down her arm until it was gone. Whether they were true didn't matter. What mattered was that someone said them. Belief spreads not like fire, but like embroidery, stitched slowly, mouth to ear, over generations. One story builds upon another. A single miracle becomes a village legend. A dozen legends become tradition. Soon, no one remembers the first corpse, only that the hand worked. Sometimes belief needs a body, a symbol, something to press against. In this case, the hand. It's intimate, it's relatable, can touch without hurting. But the hand is also a metaphor. It represents connection, help, presence. And what is belief, if not the hope that something, anything, is reaching out to you, even from the other side? There's also the question of control. In a chaotic world, where sickness came unannounced and death lingered like fog, belief gave people something to do. Touch the hand, say the words, bury the potato, count to 3. Action replaces helplessness. And in that moment, even if nothing changes, you feel less alone. Because belief is not about certainty. It's about motion, even in the dark. Now, does any of this still exist? Absolutely. Modern medicine has miracles, yes, but belief never left. It just changed costumes. Now it looks like vitamin rituals, wellness influencers, healing crystals, sleep headphones tuned to 528 hertz, a blanket that promises to hug your anxiety away. These are not new ideas. They are old needs, dressed in contemporary fabric. The belief is the same. The bone is just wearing polyester now. So maybe the dead hand is still with us. Not literal anymore, not swinging from a gallows, but in spirit, in every whispered hope that something, anything, might help us feel a little better, a little safer, a little seen, that someone out there or in here is still holding on, still reaching, still trying. Tonight, as you lie down, your own hands resting on your chest, Feel them for a moment. They're warm. They're yours. They're alive. But they also carry memory of all the hands that came before. Saints, sinners, mothers, midwives, executioners, dreamers. Each of them believed something. And because they did, you're here, breathing, listening, sleeping, and maybe, just maybe, believing a little too. You've heard of doctors in white coats, of healers with stethoscopes, of saints with glowing hands. But tonight, we meet the strangest physician of them all. A practitioner without pulse, without pride, without prescription. Death, not as the enemy, but as the cure. Because for centuries, in quiet corners and crowded squares, people turned to death not to end pain, but to ease it. Let's lie still and explore this final paradox. Death as doctor. It starts with a simple truth. In many cultures, death wasn't feared. It was respected. Feared, yes, in some contexts, but also consulted, invoked, even used. If something was too stubborn to cure, a wart, a cough, a grief, you brought it to the one force that never failed to end suffering. Death. And if death could end life, surely it could also end lesser problems, those small, lingering miseries that medicine ignored. The dead, after all, were not seen as absent. They were present, watching, waiting, sometimes whispering. And so, in the minds of the desperate, the poor, the forgotten, death became a resource. It had nothing else to do after all. Why not help? A hanged man could give you his warmth. A skull could give you its calm. A rotting hand could steal your rash. And no one would miss any of it. Because death was not selfish. Death gave freely. In folk medicine, this took many forms. Blood of the recently dead used for epilepsy. Fat from the corpse used for sprains. Bone dust taken in wine for courage. The shadow of a funeral walked through to absorb luck. The touch of a corpse's hand pressed to your wound. All of it strange. All of it real to those who believed. They didn't see death as an end. They saw it as a clinic. In parts of Finland, people laid their sick children on graves. Not out of cruelty. Out of hope. They believed that the earth itself, rich with the dead, could pull the illness down. Let the bones take it, they said. The child is still growing. Let the earth do the rest. In certain Romanian villages, widows whispered their ailments into skulls. Take this pain, they'd say. It's old. Like you. Then they'd walk home lighter. Maybe from belief. Maybe from breath. But better. And then there's the German tradition of the Totendoktor, the death doctor. This wasn't an official physician. This was a concept. The Totendoktor was imagined as a skeletal healer. Someone who visited the sick in the night, not to take them, but to negotiate. He might offer a deal. Let me have your fear and you may keep your lungs. Give me your nightmares and I will leave your bones intact. People would set a chair by the bed. Leave it empty. A seat for death. To sit. To consider. To listen. Sometimes they'd wake up and the pain was gone. Sometimes they died. But either way, death had done its job. In Italy, it was said that touching the threshold of a crypt could cleanse your blood. A literal contact point between worlds. Lovers with broken hearts would press their palms to tombs. Not to mourn, but to calm. The dead, it was said, had no use for longing, and could take yours if asked politely. Leave it here, the living would say. Take it under. In some folk traditions, people even buried objects to be cured. A scarf that held a cough, a comb tangled with hair loss, a sock worn during grief. They dig a shallow grave, place the item, say a few words, and let death swallow the sickness. In a few weeks, they'd feel better. No autopsy needed, just dirt and silence. So why did this work? Maybe it didn't. Maybe it only soothed the heart. But maybe just maybe, death listens, not in the way we think, not as a being, but as a force, a space that absorbs, a silence that heals, a stillness that makes room. Modern medicine doesn't like to talk about death. It's seen as the final failure. But in these older stories, death is not the end of healing. It's a partner in it, a quiet collaborator, a dark pharmacist, not because it cures everything, but because it offers the one thing pain hates most: stillness. Tonight, as you lie between breath and sleep, you may feel something heavy and gentle near your feet. Not fear, not sorrow, just presence. The idea that somewhere beneath the floorboards, beneath the layers of time, beneath all your memories and worries, death is waiting, not to take you, not tonight, just to help a little, to lift something, to hold something, to remind you that nothing, not even pain, lasts forever. So sleep, and if you dream of a doctor with no face, with a satchel full of cold, with a hand made of fog, let him in, let him listen, and let him take what he came for. You'll wake lighter, or you won't, but either way, you'll be okay. We're nearing the end now, but endings, as you've seen, aren't always what they seem. They can be soft, slow, wrapped in cloth and laid carefully by the fire. Tonight, we follow the last healers. Not doctors, not priests, not saints, but the ones who gave the final touch. A hand placed after death, not to comfort the dying, but to heal the living. Because sometimes the final gesture isn't farewell. It's medicine. Let's meet the last healing hands. Picture this. A small room, stone walls, low ceiling. A wooden table with a body laid upon it. Still warm. Eyes closed, mouth bound shut with a strip of linen. This isn't a crime scene. It's not even a funeral yet. It's a moment of opportunity. Around the table, quietly, the villagers gather. A woman with a tremor in her hands. A boy with a patchy scalp. A man with pain in his belly that won't let go. They've come not to mourn, but to touch. Just once. One finger. One breath. Because the body on the table just departed is still close enough to the other side to help. This ritual was practiced in dozens of forms across dozens of cultures. In Scotland, the freshly dead were believed to carry healing energy in the first hours after death. In Bavaria, a corpse's hand was rubbed gently across the affected area, a lump, a rash, a twisted ankle. In Ukraine, mourners would lift the hand of the dead and press it to their own forehead, not as farewell, but as a blessing. In France, a small child might be passed over the body of the deceased to absorb calmness or health or protection. It was the final gift of the dead, a way to leave something behind. In some places, the hand had to be the dominant hand, the right hand for men, the left for women. In others, it had to be the non-dominant one so as not to disturb the soul's journey. Always rules, always variations, but always the same belief. That death was a door, and for a few short hours it stayed ajar. And in that space, the hand could reach both ways. These rituals weren't random. They were often planned. There are accounts of families inviting neighbors to come touch before burial, as if the body had become a communal relic. Briefly, one woman in 1830s Wales was known to have cured 3 cases of shingles post-mortem. They called her, fondly, the lady with the healing elbow. She never knew. She was already gone. Of course, not everyone believed. Doctors began warning against these practices. Unsanitary, they said. Superstitious. One pamphlet from 1892 reads, "The idea that death leaves behind healing virtue is dangerous and unhygienic. The only thing the dead offer is disease." But the villagers continued anyway, because no sterile opinion could outweigh a boy's rash fading overnight, or a trembling hand that finally stilled. They weren't measuring in microbes. They were measuring in peace. There's a deeper beauty here, too. The dead became useful. In a world where so many people died with nothing. No money, no legacy, no voice. This ritual gave them one last act. To heal. To help. To be remembered not as a body that failed, but as a body that gave. Even in death, there was purpose. Some believed the dead were aware of the ritual, that their spirits hovered, pleased to be of service. Others said nothing. They didn't need to explain it. Just touch. Just believe. Just go home. And see if tomorrow felt better. One of the most poetic versions comes from Norway. In a village where a child was dying of fever, the parents carried him to the home of a woman who had just passed away. They placed the boy's tiny hand inside the dead woman's hand, folded the fingers around it, waited, and the child slept there. 4 hours. When he awoke, the fever was gone. He grew up, became a baker, died at 87, and every year on the anniversary of that day, he baked a small loaf, shaped like a hand, and left it on her grave. You won't find that story in medical textbooks, but it healed something, somewhere. And what of now? We don't do this anymore. Bodies are whisked away. Funerals are silent. Hands are gloved. But the impulse remains. We still touch the photo, the pillow, the clothes. We still say he would have helped me. And maybe he does, in ways we don't name. So tonight, if you think of someone who's gone, someone whose hand you wish you could hold, even just once more, reach out, not physically, but in memory, in need, in faith, because maybe that's what these rituals were about all along. Not the hand itself, but the feeling that someone, even now, still wants to help. Sleep then. Let the final touches find you, not as ghosts, not as chills, but as warmth. A hand long gone, resting on your shoulder, saying without sound, "You are not alone." By now the story has slowed. The gallows have emptied. The relics rest quietly in their golden boxes. The whispering hand has faded into dreams. And yet, something still lingers. A question, presence, a kind of hush that doesn't feel like absence, but like attention. Tonight, we explore the softest cure of all. No touch, no herbs, no prayers, just silence. Let's discover the silent cure, where healing came not from doing, but from not doing anything at all. Silence in medicine is often treated like a side effect. Pause between treatments, an absence of pain, the moment when the doctor leaves the room. But in many old traditions, especially those centered on death, spirits, and healing, silence was a remedy in itself. It wasn't empty, it was charged, and it wasn't passive. It was listening. There are reports from the early 1600s of silent vigils kept by the bedsides of the sick. No talking, no singing, no explanation, just family, neighbors, even strangers, sitting, watching, breathing in rhythm with the patient. It was believed that the shared silence could draw out illness, that disease hated stillness, that pain, like a noisy spirit, needed distraction to thrive. Remove the noise, remove the power. In Eastern European villages, a tradition called husk silence involved placing dried corn husks under the bed of the ill, not for herbs, not for aroma, but because the crackle of husks under movement would interrupt the sacred quiet. It was a kind of booby trap, not for thieves, but for words. You didn't speak, you didn't cough, you didn't name the sickness, for fear it would wake up. The silence became a barrier, and somehow patience got better. In parts of the English countryside, there was a belief that the dead disliked loud grief. If a household mourned too loudly, it was said the spirit of the deceased would linger, disturbed by the racket. But if they were allowed to leave in quiet, they might return with help, a cure, a dream, a sign. Thus, some families mourned in strict silence for 3 days, not to suppress sadness, but to create a path for something gentler. This principle extended to healing. If you wanted the dead to help, you had to make room, and room was made through stillness. A house would go quiet, curtains drawn, fires banked low, no songs, no gossip, just the ticking of a clock. Even children were told to whisper, not to respect the dying, but to invite the healing. Noise scared it away. One diary from 1783 describes a woman who suffered from madness of the nerves, what we might now call anxiety, depression, or seizures. Her family, desperate, stopped feeding her potions. They simply sat in total silence with her for 3 nights. No eye contact, no candlelight, only the sound of the wind and the wood creaking. And on the 4th day, she spoke. It's quiet enough to think again. She recovered soon after. The family credited the air. The doctor credited the moon. But the woman, she credited the quiet. In modern medicine, we don't often prescribe silence. But consider white noise machines, meditation apps, noise-canceling headphones, do not disturb modes, sleep retreats, SMR whispers. We're still chasing it, still hoping that, in the absence of input, something inside us will recalibrate. Perhaps the dead hand was never meant to heal. Perhaps it was just meant to still you long enough for your body to begin healing itself. There are stories of patients lying in tombs, not dead, just unwell. In certain Mediterranean regions, there were shrines where you could lie for hours. Among the crypts, you were given water, a blanket, and a priest who would say nothing. It was believed the bones around you would whisper back your balance. And sometimes they did. A man with insomnia, a woman with grief, a child with tics, all claimed to leave the tombs calmer, not cured, but different. Sometimes people didn't need a cure. They just needed a pause, a way to step outside their own noise, to be in a room where nothing happened, where no one asked how they were, where no one offered advice, just the sound of breath and the feeling of being watched by someone who wasn't there. So what exactly was the silent cure? It wasn't an action. It wasn't a technique. It was a gift of space, the sacred gap between one heartbeat and the next, a room without answers, a treatment without hands, a medicine you take by not taking anything at all. Tonight you may not feel ill, or maybe you do just a little, that quiet ache behind the eyes, that tired sadness that doesn't have a name. Don't fight it, don't fix it, just let it sit beside you, let it listen, let it be still, and maybe, just maybe, the silence will offer something back. Not a miracle, not a revelation, but a softness, a kind of permission to rest. We are almost done, but not quite. There's one more breath to take, one more ember glowing in the ashes. Tonight, we walk among what's left behind, not bones, not relics, not stories, but the invisible residue that clings to the world after a body is gone. Because the dead leave traces. Not just in memory, but in places, in gestures, in corners of rooms where dust refuses to settle. And maybe, just maybe, those traces have power, healing even now. Let's begin with a broom. Yes, a broom. In parts of rural Eastern Europe, after someone died, the family would sweep the floor toward the center of the house, not out the door. Why? Because it was believed that the healing power of the dead still lingered in their final steps. To sweep it away would be wasteful, disrespectful. Some even collected the dust and buried it beneath the family garden. A strange fertilizer, but the tomatoes always grew tall. In northern France, there was a tradition of not washing the sheets of the dead for 3 days. Not because of mourning, but because the fabric was thought to retain the healing warmth of the person who'd passed. If someone else was sick in the home, they'd be allowed to lie in the same bed to soak in whatever strength was left. Even the impression of a body was seen as restorative. One widow reportedly slept in the exact curled position of her husband for nights on end. "I felt him," she said, "fixing things in me." In Italy, some families used the ashes of the dead, carefully collected, stored in wooden boxes, to make a paste. Not for baking, for healing. A small dab mixed with olive oil and rosemary, applied behind the ears of crying children, to remind them where they came from, said one grandmother. The practice faded, but the jars remained on shelves long after their purpose had been forgotten. A kind of homemade relic, domestic, dusty, sacred. In 19th century Wales, the shoes of the dead were sometimes worn by the ill. Why? Because it was believed that sickness could walk away if given the proper footwear. Children with twisted legs, men with bad lungs, women with invisible sadness, all given shoes that had walked through death already. And some of them got better, even if they didn't. They walked differently, softer, as if sharing footsteps with someone else. There's a tale from Poland of a healing cupboard. After a woman's death, her husband kept her clothes folded exactly as she left them. When neighbors grew sick with colds or melancholy, he invited them to open the cupboard. Nothing more. No touching. No speaking. Just to stand there. Smell the fabric. Let memory settle. He swore that people left lighter. Not because of ghosts, but because of the imprint of care. A kind of medicine made of habits. In Japanese Shinto traditions, ancestral shrines are kept not just to honor the dead, but to draw guidance from them. Offerings are made, prayers whispered, but often the most healing moments happen in silence, just sitting before the shrine. The belief is not that the dead fix things. The belief is that they listen. And sometimes that's enough. To say, "I don't know what to do," and feel somehow that someone heard you. Even in modern times, we do this. We wear their coats. We play their music. We keep their chairs. We say, "What would she do?" Not as a phrase, as a method, as if their fingerprints still rest on our doorknobs, as if they left behind more than just DNA, as if the dead wrote us a secret prescription, hidden in the folds of time. Perhaps they did, not in ink, but in touch. A hand that held you once. A face that smiled at you when you were sick. A word spoken in your worst moment that still echoes. These are not memories. These are doses. Slow-release capsules of meaning. Taken unconsciously. And sometimes, just when you need them most, they kick in. One man wrote in his journal, "My mother's been dead 20 years, but every time I cough, I still feel her hand on my back saying, 'You're okay.'" Is that healing? If the body responds, if the muscles relax, if the breath deepens, who's to say it isn't? The dead leave behind more than what we bury. They leave us ways to be better, to sleep, to stop crying, to forgive, to go outside again. Tonight, you lie not alone, but surrounded by embers. Tiny, glowing things the dead left in your bones. in your voice, in the way you stir tea, in the way you look at the sky when it rains. You are made of medicine you didn't know you inherited, and it is working, even now, even here. So close your eyes and thank them if you want, or don't. They understand. They left it for you anyway, not for credit, but because they knew. The world is hard, and hands don't last forever, but the warmth of hands, that stays. This is the end, the final hand, the last page, the breath you didn't realize you were holding, finally exhaled. You've come with me through the gallows and the graveyard, through melted butter and mummified fingers, through folk magic and whispered dreams. And now there's only one thing left to do: sleep, but not alone. Tonight we speak softly about the hand you hold when the lights go out, the one that comforts without gripping, that steadies without pulling. A hand that might not be yours, might not be real, might not even be warm, but it's there, and it helps. All of us, in one way or another, are reaching across the bed, across the years, across the veil. We want connection, touch, a signal that we are not the only thing awake in the dark, that someone, anyone, knows we're here, that if we drift too far, they'll give a gentle squeeze, just enough to say, still with you. For some, this hand is memory, parent, a lover, a sibling lost too early. We don't imagine them out of fantasy. We remember them because they once were real. Their hands once touched ours in kitchens, on staircases, on sickbeds. And somewhere in the body, perhaps in the nerves, perhaps in the soul, that contact remains. The dead do not knock. They rest in your gestures. For others, the hand is hope, a future comfort, a promise that healing is possible, that the wound you carry, the ache that never quite stops aching, will one day be met with understanding. Even if no one says the right thing, even if the cure never comes, someone will sit beside you, say nothing, and hold your hand, and you will know, in that moment, that this is enough. Even children understand this. They reach for teddy bears, for blankets with names, for imaginary friends, because instinct tells them, touch protects, even pretend touch. And who's to say it's pretend? Is a memory any less real? Because it comes without a heartbeat? There are stories, always stories, of people at the brink of death, who reach out to something no one else can see, hands raised into empty air, fingers curled around silence. Sometimes they smile, sometimes they say names, sometimes they just whisper, I'm ready. Maybe someone is waiting there. Maybe someone always was. In folklore, death is often personified with a hand outstretched. Not a blade, not a sack, a hand. Because even at the end, we want to be held. Even when the story stops, we want to turn the page with someone beside us. Even when we are not cured, we want to not be alone. And so, after all these strange, beautiful, terrifying rituals, we end with this truth. The greatest medicine is not powdered bone, or relics, or executioner's grease. It's the sense that someone is holding your hand, even if they're gone, even if you're dreaming, even if you're only imagining it, especially then. So let this be your ritual. Lie down, close your eyes, feel the weight of your body on the bed, the rise and fall of breath, the warmth of the blanket. Now imagine the hand. It doesn't matter whose, can be cold or warm, can be real, or memory can be the hand of a mother, a saint, criminal, a child you never got to meet, a version of you from long ago. It doesn't matter. What matters is this: it holds you, gently, without asking, without leaving. Let the stories settle. Let the strangeness of healing pass like fog. The world is quieter now. The warts are gone, the rash forgotten, the tremors have faded. You're here, and someone is still holding on. You don't need a name for it, or a reason, or a scientific study. You just need to believe that, in all the absurdity of life and death, touch matters, even from the other side, even now, especially now. So sleep. You've heard enough, felt enough, healed enough, and if in the middle of the night you wake and feel something next to you, pressure, a stillness, presence, don't be afraid. That's just the hand, still there, still helping, still holding you. While you sleep,